Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 218 of Rush Roundtable. We're kind of in the midst of our Test for Echo song discussions, and Paul came to me with this idea to talk about kind of our evolution of our favorite Rush albums. So, kind of where did we start, kind of how that progressed, and through the duration of our fandom, kind of where we're at now in terms of what our favorite Rush album is. And we're kind of interested to see what other people say in the comments too. So, first and foremost, our panel, top left-hand corner, Todd Evans. Top middle, myself, Ryan Murphy. Top right, Paul Simon, not to be confused with Paul Simon. Bottom left corner, Sarah and Diana. Welcome back. It's been a while.
It's been a while.
In the bottom middle, Brendan Middleton. And in the bottom right, Nick Howley. So got a really good panel here. A lot of familiar faces to the channel. Just want to suggest, if you like our videos, check out our Ko-fi in the description and graphics on the screen. You can check out our shop, help support the channel. You get yourself some Rush fans merch and some MP Tour merch. Sarah and Diana, you got your merch in our shop too, so you can check that out as well. And check out our sponsors that are listed in the description, some discount codes and so on and so forth. So let's get right into it. So each one of us is going to kind of share, like I said, what Rush album was your first favorite Rush album and kind of how that progressed throughout your fandom. So Todd, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, I started listening to Rush when I was in the 10th grade, so that would have been 1979. And the first thing I heard was Archives, kind of the whole thing all at once, which is the first three Rush albums for those not familiar. But this would have been when the newest Rush album was Hemispheres. So I pretty much settled on a Farewell to Kings pretty early. And that kind of that stuck for a while. But I kind of went through a evolution where up until a certain point, every new Rush album I liked better than this one, even though if I had to pick, I would always say this one. So that pretty much continues without going through too much detail. That pretty much continues through Roll the Bones. And then when I got to Counterparts, that was the first time I thought, this is one that I don't like as much as the one before it. And so all the albums after that I had to revisit to really appreciate. But the one that I really zeroed in on, and after the release of this album, if you'd have asked me what my favorite one was, I would pick this one. And to this day, it's still my favorite, and that would be Power Windows 2. No surprise to some people. And it pretty much has stayed there.
All right. So for me, became a Rush fan in 2007 in the fall through the song Fly By Night, and it's wearing this t-shirt. I then got the Spirit of Radio Greatest Hits compilation record for Christmas that year. And then I got Rush Gold, another Greatest Hits after that. And I really kind of zeroed in on the Grace Under Pressure songs. And I didn't do any research for this, but I believe those two songs were Distant Early Warning and Red Sector A that were on those two sets. So I always thought that my first favorite Rush album was Grace Under Pressure. And it was that for a while. That was my high school years, 2007 to 2011. And I saw the Time Machine Tour 2010 when Moving Pictures became my favorite album at that time because it was played live in full. Then I really got into the two Clockwork Angels songs that were done on that tour prior to the album's release. And of course, that being the last album they ever did, and Snakes and Arrows coming out prior to me becoming a fan, Clockwork Angels was the only album that I really could get excited for. So got really excited for that. That came out, loved the Headlong Flight single. And then Clockwork Angels really became my favorite Rush album for a good year or so. And then the Clockwork Angels tour rolled around when they did a heck of a lot of Power Windows songs. So Clockwork Angels and Power Windows were like two of my favorite records for a while. To this day, if anybody asks me what my favorite Rush album is, you'll always hear me say Power Windows, but I will explain that. I think this is the episode to do it on. So I like every Rush album. Recently, meaning like the last couple of years, I really kind of zeroed in on Snakes and Arrows, really kind of started digging that record. But I always will fall back on Power Windows as my favorite if someone just asks me, right? What's your favorite Rush record? Okay, it's Power Windows. Primarily because I can put that record on in any mood and be happy listening to it. Um, for me, I love all Rush. And quite really recently, like really been digging Caress of Steel, Fly By Night in the debut album. And I know that folks that watch the Contrarians channel will probably kill me for that because I listed those as like what I thought were the three worst. I hate the W word, um, but they're probably ranked below us. But I'm digging them recently, so it's like for me, my evolution of Rush favorite Rush albums is really just anything at any time. You tell me what record to put on, I'll put it on. I'll listen to it. I'll love it. Um, but my fallback is always Power Windows, same as Todd. So that's kind of my evolution. But obviously, running this page and having to listen to Rush all the time, which is not a bad thing, but doing that to run this channel, I just love everything. So all Rush is good Rush. So Paul, what do you got?
Mine's sort of an amalgam of the two, but with different evolution-wise, but with different albums. I'd heard as a kid, I'd heard New World Man because that was like outside of the classic rock. I was listening more to pop stations when I was in my like before around like age 9, 10, 11, around then, and I heard New World Man a lot, so I liked that song, but I was too young to say, oh, I like that sound and I like that, I want to hear more. So when I was around 16, 17, I think it was 16, a buddy of mine, I saw a commercial for Show of Hands and Marathon, there was a clip of Marathon's chorus. I'm like, that's what got my interest. So I've told the story before, but that Presto being my first tour that I saw, my first new album, Midnight Release, for those of you who remember those, still miss those, but Midnight Release albums and all that, have to still represent there. So sort of like Todd said, every new album became the one that I gravitated towards the most. So I went through Presto into Roll the Bones, into Counterparts, into Test for Echo. With the hiatus, when Vapor Trails came out, it didn't grab me as much as the other ones had, and they were evolving and my tastes weren't. So I stuck with it. Feedback came out, R30 came around, all that, and that was the last tour I saw live ever, because I sort of just started listening to other stuff, and I would go back to my old Rush favorites. I didn't listen to the older catalog because Show of Hands being what I listened to the most, and Rush Chronicles, I'm going to throw my shot out to that too. I picked that up the same time I picked up Presto. And so if it was an older song on that album, I liked it. If it was either performed on Show of Hands or placed on Chronicles, then I knew of its existence. But the 70s stuff didn't really attract me as much. Jump ahead to a couple years ago, and I'm like, I need to get back into Rush. There's so much I haven't gotten into. And then obviously my association with the channel, some life events, things like that. And I decided to start basically pulling R40 and work my way backwards. So Clockwork Angels was constantly, probably for a year, the album I would instantly put on while still falling back on my other old favorites. And then as I became involved with the channel here and with Stick It Out, actually, I got to credit Ryan with putting me on Stick It Out. That got me into the 70s stuff, made me appreciate it, made me research it.
To clarify, Paul means our series that we call Stick It Out for those that are new viewers of the channel. Yeah.
You listen to something that didn't grab you or you didn't prefer or didn't like, and most of mine were 70s songs, and I turned that into 70s albums and finally developed an appreciation for the older material and the full history as well. Jump ahead to now, and I would say favorite album, I still have to go with Clockwork Angels. It's got everything I look for in a Rush album. I agree with the sentiment that has been voiced by some, including the band. It's their best. yes, that can be very subjective, but it's the one I appreciate the most work-wise. But as far as fallback listen to these days, actually, I've been finding myself listening a lot to Grace Under Pressure. I don't know if that's the climate we're currently living in or what, but I even like a palate cleanser. I'll be listening to whatever we're working on, like right now, Test for Echo videos. So Test for Echo is constantly on, sort of as you alluded to, Ryan. So I've been living and breathing Test for Echo, and by sort of with that, Victor, it gave me a new appreciation for Victor because I want to hear how Alex is playing evolved. And I'm pretty sure next that'll mean for me my favorite headache going into Vapor Trails. But that being said, my palate cleanser when I'm in between episodes and stuff, all of a sudden it's like I really feel like listening to Kid Gloves. Or it's been a little bit since I heard After Image and I've got the hook in my head. Things like that. So, but to nail one go-to point at album now went from A Show of Hands or Presto into Clockwork Angels.
Good stuff. Diana, Sarah, whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I'll go first. My first Rush album was 2112 in 1977 when my brother handed it to me, and I listened to it over and over and over. It became my absolute favorite album. Kind of skipped the next four, I think because my brother moved away during that time. And then the first, my next favorite was Grace Under Pressure, which was actually my first concert and finally old enough to go. And then from then on through Test for Echo, it was whatever the new album was. My last vinyl album was Presto, but whether it was vinyl or CD, I'd get the album, I would listen to it constantly, just really immerse myself in it, and it was my favorite. And then I kind of skipped Vapor Trails, and I think that's because during that time, there were just a lot of concerts. You know, we had R30, we had the Moving Pictures. I think during that time, Moving Pictures was probably my favorite for a while because I went back to it. And then, you know, we were just busy going and seeing them constantly. So when Snakes and Arrows came out, again, you know, got the CD, immersed myself in it, became my favorite, and I never moved forward. So one of these days I might, you know, give Clockwork Angels a better listen, and that might change, but I've kind of been stuck on Snakes and Arrows.
So I have a question. So like Clockwork Angels, how did you like it being their last and everything? I mean, how many listens have you given it, I guess? Because I know you guys listen to Rush so much on like road trips and such, right?
I mean, we had the CD, and I know that we listened to it a ton before the concert.
Somehow I actually ended up with like 3 copies of that CD,
Mm-hmm.
but I probably
So
only.
it's kind of like just listen but don't digest type of thing with Clockwork Angels.
Yeah, I just haven't sat and given it the
Gotcha.
time, you know, where I would normally sit and when I was, you know, young with my album, looking at the lyrics, that kind of
yeah.
thing.
Well, and I think that at the time Clockwork Angels came out, I don't think that we were driving that much because her commute to work was like 5 minutes.
That's true.
And so I don't think that she ever got to listen. I don't think that you've ever listened to it, just sat and like
Gotcha.
listened
Yeah,
in order.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I haven't really given it a fair shot to this day, but that's because I'm so stuck on the other.
That's fair.
I don't know what the first album was that I heard. My first concert was R30, but obviously I grew up on it. But in my 20s, like my early 20s, in high school, Presto became my favorite album because I loved The Pass. And that was, I think, when I heard The Pass, I think it was like the first song that I heard that I'm like, oh, like, you know, I hadn't heard it before, and it really, like, I just really liked it. So Presto was my favorite album throughout high school, and then early 20s, it was 2112, and that was my favorite album for, I think, 5 or 6 years, from the time I was in grad school until my kid was born, like after that. And then it's still one of my favorites, but the last couple of years, my kind of like my go-to. If you asked me what my favorite was, it'd be Caress of Steel. But the thing is, my favorite Rush album is whatever album I'm listening to. And when I listen to any like any artist, I listen to albums in order. I can't stand listening to music on shuffle. So like when I listen to Rush, I pick an album, and whatever album I pick, that's my favorite. But I most often, the last couple of years, almost every day, I pick Caress of Steel.
See, I'm a little bit different. I can do both. I'll put a record on over here if I want to listen to something top to bottom, but like in the car, because I don't do much driving anymore, I just put it on shuffle just so that I can hear a diverse group of songs. So like,
I like to listen to the radio, but for some reason, like any artist on shuffle or picking a, classic rock on Spotify, I don't like it. So I don't mind listening to the radio, but yeah, if I'm driving, I pick an album, and it sometimes drives people crazy. But
I mean, I
think
get
it's
it, but
supposed to be listened. It's the way music is supposed to be listened to.
oh, I agree. I think it's just today's day and age. It's
Mm-hmm.
you have the ability to do do it however you want, right? And it's just kind of, anyways, that's for another time. Brendan, what do you got?
So it's fun to hear these different perspectives. I love listening to Rush on Shuffle because each new song is like an exciting surprise to me. But yeah, as I said, different
That's a good point.
perspectives. And speaking of perspectives, I wanted to bring the perspectives of someone who, even though my tastes have evolved, even though I'm a different person than I was 30 years ago when I became a fan, I'm someone whose favorite Rush album has always been the same. And I mentioned this a few years ago on my Rush Roots episode. When I first heard Hemispheres as a teenager back in around 91, it was the first album that ever like spoke to me and resonated with me. The whole idea of the need for balance between art and music and logic and reason. This was just something that like in my curious teenage brain just set off like a firework. And of course the music and the musicianship was spectacular. I remember thinking way back then, like, wow, I can hear each individual instrument. Nothing is getting like lost. And so I was so thrilled when I read My F and Life, and I heard Geddy felt the same way when he first heard the album when they were recording it. And a footnote, as many of you know, I had Geddy sign my copy of Hemispheres back when his solo record came out. So I think that added a nostalgic element for me that I've never been able to shake. So decades later, I'm a well-rounded Rush enthusiast. Like Ryan said, I love every album. I've actually been rediscovering the first album as we approach its 50th anniversary in March. But nothing has changed. I love everything, but I'll always come back again and again and again to Hemispheres as my first love and favorite.
Yep. Makes complete sense. Nick, what do you got?
Yeah, so this was depressing to actually think about for me, because I realized how much I've changed and how much my taste has changed and how much older I am and how our tastes and personalities and just what we're into as we get older change, as well as memories attached to stuff. So my favorite album for the longest time was All the World's a Stage in terms of overall albums. In terms of studio albums, my favorite was 2112, which I got into because of All the World's a Stage, which I got into. So that was weird because my first album was Exit State was whatever, it doesn't matter. And but the
Well, yeah, it
first
kind of does.
but that wasn't my favorite album. Like I wasn't like I loved it because it was just Rush, but I wasn't like, oh my God, this album, like, whoa. Like, no, I just loved it because I had it. The first studio album I actually got in my possession, oddly enough, was Snakes and Arrows. I got it. I to this day, my mom still makes me an Easter basket. Like she still puts together candy and stuff. And in 2007, which would have been my junior year of high school, she put Snakes and Arrows in that Easter basket. And for about 2 weeks, I rocked it until, for whatever reason, I bought All the World's a Stage at Circuit City with my cousin. I used to do Circuit City runs about once a month, and I'd buy all kinds of death metal albums, and I owned all the 50 Cent, Lil Jon's albums, and I was into all kinds of crazy, like, let's party music. And for whatever reason, I got sucked into the world of 70s Rush, and I was obsessed with like that 1974 to 79 era. So for the longest time, All the World's a Stage, and like I kind of forgot about all the other stuff I was listening to that whole summer of 2007 for my senior year was just All the World's a Stage with a little bit of Snakes and Arrows. And funny enough, I went and saw that was the first summer I saw Rush 2 in concert. Well, fast forward, and I was thinking about this today because I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely not my favorite album anymore, because I can't tell you the last time I even put any songs from All the World's a Stage on, even on my Spotify. Which, speaking of, it's wild. I'm a child of Spotify at this point. I don't own a single physical album. Hate saying that because mine all burnt a few years ago. I lost all my physical media. So for me, it's like it's hard to determine the exact album. So I was like, well, why don't I take a look and see what the rap says about like the number one song I listened to more than anything last for the calendar year of 2023 was Emotion Detector. No, not a live recording anywhere of that. And everyone who's ever known me about Rush knows that I like am a stickler for live. Recently, I've been banging Territories when I've been riding my bike. And then I started to realize I can literally listen to Power Windows from start to finish. Not that I can't listen to other albums, but it's like when I listen to, for instance, Grace Under Pressure. What's the song that starts out I See Red? I'm sorry, I apologize. I forget the song.
Red Lenses.
Red Lenses.
I skip Red Lenses every time. I mean, I don't hate it.
So do I.
Skip. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Red Tide on Presto, which, by the way, Presto has moved into one of my top 5 albums ever, which is hilarious because everyone knows there's certain stuff on there I do not like. But
songs that will remain nameless.
I
Certain
literally
stuff.
skip Red Tide every time, so I can't listen to it all the way through. I don't skip any songs on Power Windows. And then I was like, well, dang, I don't skip any songs. Emotion Detector was my number one. I personally think Power Windows might be the best. I know everyone says Counterparts has the best sound. I actually think Power Windows might be the best sonically, might be the best sounding album. And I'm like, holy crap, Power Windows is my favorite album. So that's like the weirdest thing is like Power Windows is my favorite album. And a couple years ago, I stood up for the 70s versus the 80s. And here I am straight up admitting like, yeah, I listen to mostly 80s Rush now, as well as like some of their 90s and 2000s now when I ride my bike. And honestly, I don't listen to a lot of the live stuff from Exit Stage Left or All the World's a Stage. I just don't. And I'm actually looking across the room at my All the World's a Stage vinyl that I have. I don't have a record player, but I have the vinyl just up. And I can't tell you the last time I listened to the song. I just think that's a product of, we asked the question going into this was, how has it changed? Well, for me, it's I'm older and I'm not the same kind of person. Like not really into and which is funny because I still love the 70s vibe. My favorite bands I've come to realize my top 4 favorite bands of all time are all born out of the 70s. Well, pretty much born out of the 70s. They're known mainly for their 70s stuff. And yet here I am with Rush and I'm mostly listening to their late 80s stuff. So it's just, I guess it's just an example of how getting older changes tastes and
I don't even know if it's age though, because like I'll follow that up. So we did that debate 3 years ago at this point, probably, where I debated for the 80s and you debated for the 70s. And recently I've been into a lot more of the 70s stuff. 2112, Aggressive Steel, Fly By Night, the debut album. I don't know why. And I don't think it has anything to do with age. I don't think it has anything to do with mood or anything. I think it's just I've just been listening to it and I've just been enjoying it still. And I think to Brendan's point, I think it was Brendan that said this. your favorite Rush album is the one you're listening to now, or maybe it was Sarah. I think it was Sarah. The favorite. Brendan said something similar that stuck with me, but I think it's just the favorite one. The favorite one is the one you're listening to now, and you always have one that you will fall back on. Like everyone has that one album that they'll fall back to, or default to, but there's so much good material that we love it all, right? So
Yeah.
Well,
Can I
I
say
think,
something?
oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Real quick, Nick, you brought up the whole the year-end wrap-up thing. I was stunned to find out, and probably due to some of the roundtable things we've done over the last year, but my two most often listened to songs count-wise for last year were Alien Shore and Double Aging. That blew my mind. I'm like, wow, I must have really, really done the deep dive for that. And right now I could put either one of them on and I'm right back there. So you brought up Counterparts and you brought up Count, and that fit both of them for me. I wouldn't have picked Counterparts necessarily as a favorite. It's definitely my top tier, my top third. But the more I think about it, that evolution of it, I'd mentioned how I could put on I've been listening to Kid Gloves and After Image a lot. But now that I stop and think about it, last year, I did listen to Alien Shore and Double Agent more often than pretty much any other Rush song. So it's just weird how we evolve.
well, that's
I realized why my mom and like when Clockwork Angels came out, so she drove forever a 1998 Ford Mustang, and when Snakes and Arrows, at some point Snakes and Arrows came out and the CD player broke and it got stuck in the CD player. So the only thing we could listen to was Snakes and Arrows. So when Clockwork Angels came out, we didn't actually have a CD player to put it in. And we had to be in like somebody else's car to be listening to it. And I think that is probably why she never got to give it a good listen.
Captive audience.
it's funny.
I think,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that affects it as well, at least for me, is with the band not being active anymore, I tend to be much more diplomatic about all Rush is good Rush and enjoying everything. But when they were active, I kind of had this thing where I always wanted them to do what I wanted them to do. I wanted them to sound like this. So you get like territorial and I don't know if that's the right word, but you get defensive about them and now that they're not active and we've lost one of the members, now I have a more of a overall respectful attitude about the discography, and so that changes things too.
I think on your point with that, I remember at the live performances going in, I'm the kind of person, I don't like to know the set list before I see a show because I want to be surprised and enjoy. Otherwise, you're sitting there counting down the number of songs, you kind of know when it's going to end and kind of ruins it. So for me, I would always go into a set list. All right, I hope they play this. I hope they play that. You'd hear rumors and stuff. I remember, a very specific song. I remember when they played The Body Electric on Clockwork Angels, and I was at one of the shows they played that because it was one of the rotationals. And I was just so excited because I was like, dang, like this is a song that, and of course, silly me, I thought when I first discovered it, oh, I'm like so cool because I like this song that no one else is like as into, but it turns out every single other person at the show was just as happy about it. So it wasn't anything special, but like, yeah, I get what you're saying though. You're sitting there and you're like, oh, I hope they play this. I hope they play that. I could live without this, they play Tom Sawyer at every single show. And I'm like, I don't need to hear that. Like going to a show, I'm like, I'm good on Tom Sawyer. I do not need to hear that song. Then they play it and I'm like, and like so it is what it is. And so I mean it's hard to really, that's why I looked at my stats to figure out what is my favorite album. Because I was like, I guess that's it then for right now. Because the reality
That's
is
that's the problem. That's what same thing happened to Paul. And I don't use Spotify. I own all the physical media and have put it on my iPhone. But I think at the end of the day, that's the moral of the story here is that to steal from what the title of this video is that we're calling the evolution. Our preferences evolve, and with that opens us all up to more Rush, and hopefully our deep dive series and all of our song discussion roundtables and so on and so forth, and just our roundtables in general will open up more eyes and ears to more Rush for people, because at the end of the day, there's very few Rush songs that we as a Rush fans community, dislike. But I think overall the general Rush community, they have some that they dislike. So hopefully we're turning you on to
Hey,
more Rush. So
hey, I just want to say this. It's okay if your favorite album is Moving Pictures. It's perfectly okay if your favorite album is Moving Pictures.
absolutely.
You don't have to be niche and cool and like something that's not
Right.
like mainstream thing. You can
It's
say
okay that Moving
Pictures
Pictures is
is
your
your
favorite album. It's okay to say that Test for Echo is your favorite album. It's okay to say whatever. I mean, everybody's got preferences. Everybody's preferences evolve, and at the end of the day, all Rush is good Rush. What's that
You're-
face
you're-
for?
I don't even remember what the album's called. What's the album they did a bunch of covers of?
Feedback.
Yeah, you're not allowed to say feedback's your favorite. It doesn't count.
What was your gateway again, Nick? Tell me.
Oh, Summertime Blues from Pro Wrestling. Yeah, that's how I learned
Oh,
about
okay,
it.
just double checking. Okay.
You're still not allowed to say feedback's your favorite album. That one we're not allowing.
Well, if you made it to the end of this video, viewers, let us know in the comments kind of, what your progression of favorite Rush albums were, and where you stand now. Viewers, leave your evolution in the comments, and we will see you next week. Paul, virtuality, right?
Yes.
Okay. We're continuing Test for Echo song discussions next week. So if you don't like Test for Echo, hopefully you'll go back and watch our roundtable, and it'll make its way into your evolution of favorite Rush albums. So see you then. Take care.